The Nintendo Switch has been out for about 8 months now, and for a console that supposedly doesn't have very many games, it sure has an assload of awesome games. And the one everybody's been talking about lately has been Super Mario Odyssey. Pretty much every video game critic's given it a perfect score. It's one of those games where if anybody has the testicular fortitude to give it a 9.9 or lower, then they're gonna be fingered profusely by the rabid fanbase as being a bad critic. Probably not literally, but that's just how passionate people are about this particular game. In fact, it kinda reminds me of that other noteworthy Switch game from earlier this year that rhymes with Breath of the Child. And since both games were released in the same year, fans are spraying shitstorms at each other all over the internet over which of these two games should be Game of the Year. And while I personally don't give an uncle's nutsack about what websites give which game that title, I do have a civil duty as a public servant to answer the hard questions. And the most difficult and important question in all of human history by far is, which is the better game? Super Mario Odyssey or Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild? So let's not waste any more time besides the intro. Before we begin, let me say that these are two very different games. One's a 3D platformer and the other's a massive adventure game. And because they're both great games for different reasons, you could say that neither's truly better. It just depends on what you're in the mood for. But for the sake of answering the hard questions as advertised, I'm not gonna give you a cop-out answer like that. And if that means I've gotta take a fingering from either the Zelda or Mario fan base, then so be it. Do your worst, internet! I can take anything you can dish out. Well, with that being said, both games are damn near perfect, which means to get to the nitty-gritty, I'm gonna have to do some nitpicking. That doesn't mean that either game is bad, or that the flaws I'll be mentioning are even a big deal, but answering the hard questions is gonna require me to be, well, kind of a dick. So don't take me trying to find faults in wonderful games the wrong way, it's just that there's no other way to figure out which is better. I mean, it'd be easier to choose which one of your children you love more. And I'm not gonna do a category point system where I predictably keep the score even until the 5th and final round, because points aren't really gonna help figure out which game's better. I mean, if Game A were to barely edge Game B out in 4 categories, but Game B greatly excels in the 5th category over Game A, then Game B should still win despite having fewer points. After all, it's about which game's more enjoyable. With that being said though, it is still important to break the differences between the two games down. So let's get cracking and start with the graphics. Both games look fantastic, but Breath of the Wild drops frames from time to time, whereas I haven't had that problem once with Mario Odyssey. And some of the stuff in Breath of the Wild doesn't look as pretty up close as it does far away. Plus the overall style of Mario Odyssey will age much better over time, so I've gotta say, because of this, Mario Odyssey definitely has better graphics. But that doesn't make it a better game, nor does it really even mean Squad! As far as the controls go, both games are absolutely perfect in my opinion. The motion controls are optional and subtle to the point where they actually enhance the game should you choose to use them. Climbing trees and aiming with the gyro controls feel natural and not the least bit forced. And not to mention that they're always optional, so if you hate them, you can simply just not use them without taking anything away from either game. And another thing both games have going for themselves is the fact that coins and rupees are actually useful and worth collecting. This doesn't help figure out which game's better, I'm just happy Nintendo made these changes and wanted to give them a sportsman-like pat on the ass. Next, let's talk about the stories. You'd think this would be a clear shot for Breath of the Wild, and yeah, you'd be right. It really is. Mario Odyssey's story is more or less the same as it's always been. Bowser kidnaps Peach and Mario has to save her from a forced bestiality marriage. However, while Breath of the Wild's story's fine and dandy, not every game needs a story. Zelda does, and Breath of the Wild delivered, but story isn't important to platformers, so this doesn't really help Zelda or hinder Mario as far as I'm concerned. Story just falls into the category of preference. And if story's important to you, then you're gonna choose Breath of the Wild over a platformer or any other genre anyway. Again though, Zelda's story delivers, so I'm not taking anything away from that fact. It's just that Mario Odyssey's story isn't very important, so you can't take anything away from this game either. If you still don't get what I'm saying, then it'd be like comparing Breath of the Wild with a horse racing game, claiming that Breath of the Wild is worse because it didn't have as many horses to choose from. Like, yeah, you can ride horses in Breath of the Wild, but that's not the point of the game. With that being said though, the story in Mario Odyssey does add a little extra spice, since it's fun for what it is. So since comparing the stories isn't really that important, we should move on to gameplay and longevity, which is really gonna be the only deciding factor as to which game's better. Both games offer a different experience, so this is where it gets a little tricky. Mario Odyssey's goal is to collect over 800 moon fragments for completion, whereas Breath of the Wild has you doing various tasks such as laying the smacketh down on 4 divine beasts, collecting outfits, solving shrines, upgrading your health and stamina, foraging for materials, filling your map up, and collecting over 900 Korok seeds. But while Breath of the Wild will definitely take longer to complete, I think Mario Odyssey will give you much more variety in the activities you'll take part in. After a while, Breath of the Wild starts to feel like it's kind kinda making you do the same thing over and over again. And don't get me wrong, it's always fun, but the fact that you more or less only use the same 4 items to solve over 1,000 puzzles means there can only be so many solutions. If you think I'm full of Bologna, then look at how many test of strength shrines there are. I love that you can go anywhere you want as soon as the adventure begins, but I think it'd have been nicer to have more items so all the puzzles don't feel exactly the same the deeper you get into the game. Mario Odyssey drops you off in different regions that have various enemies you can possess that are unique to each area, and it's this that keeps the game from ever feeling repetitive. Just when you think you've got the answers, Mario Odyssey changes the questions with each region you visit by having different enemies, environments, and abilities you need to use to progress through the game. Bad guys do get stronger later on in Breath of the Wild, but don't change their patterns, so you just have to hit them more times or use stronger weapons. And I'm not sure which game actually has more enemies, but the fact that Bato has the same enemies for the entire game means that the difficulty's at its highest in the beginning when you're naked and defenseless. It only gets easier as time goes on, whereas Mario Odyssey starts off easy and gets more difficult the longer you play, which is ideally how every video game should be. And you also need to take into consideration that the Switch is portable, which is great for both games, but this is something I feel gets overlooked a little bit with Mario Odyssey. Breath of the Wild's structured in a way where you can easily just pick it up and play for short bursts and briefly explore new areas here and there, and maybe even completing a shrine or two while you're at it, yet you can also get lost and play for hours at a time. But Mario Odyssey's larger quantity of easier to obtain moons compared to the fewer but more time-consuming star collecting nature of the previous games is genius for a hybrid console. In fact, while I'm writing this, I played Mario Odyssey during a poop break and collected 2 moons. Yeah, that's right, my Switch is flagged, don't touch it. Again though, Bato is also great for playing in short bursts as well. I just feel like Mario Odyssey was designed with this in mind rather than being a happy coincidence like Breath of the Wild's portability. And I always talk about how great music is in Nintendo games, but due to Breath of the Wild's nature of constantly being in the overworld, the less is more approach was definitely the right choice. With that being said though, it is a bit of a shame that I don't ever find myself humming anything from Bato. Mario Odyssey, on the other hand, just has a lot of catchy tunes. And again, while I do agree that Breath of the Wild made the right choice in having a more subtle soundtrack, I can't lie and say that I don't prefer Odyssey's overall catchiness. I know it sounds like I'm shitting all over Zelda, and I'm sure I've got a fingering or two waiting for me in the comments section from that fan base, so I guess I'll go ahead and unintentionally rile the Mushroom Kingdom up while I'm at it, because there are a few nitpicks to be made with Mario Odyssey as well if you're trying to be a dick. And like I said before, the only way to figure out which game's better is to be a dick. So I guess that makes me the hero the internet deserves, but not the one it needs right now. With that being said though, Breath of the Wild's much more pleasant to start up. Every time you start Mario Odyssey up, you have to sit through 15 seconds of this screen that tries to convince you to use motion controls. And the fact that live-action human hands appear in the middle of the game kinda kills the magic a little bit. It'd kinda be like going to Disneyland and seeing Mickey Mouse not wearing his head. And while I don't mind that Mario Odyssey's outfits are mostly for show, with the exception of needing some to get certain moon pieces, it does irk me that capturing enemies in a different outfit still results in the enemies wearing the same standard Mario cap as opposed to whatever he was actually wearing. It is a small detail, but also kind of a big one if you think about it, that I wish Nintendo didn't overlook. And the idea of taking screen captures of hints to look at later on makes Nintendo come off as being out of touch. This leads me to believe that the higher-ups within the company really had no idea about this technology that's been around for years on rival consoles. As far as multiplayer and online is concerned, neither game requires it, but Mario Odyssey does allow people to control Cappy with an extra Joy-Con, and it is worth noting. And there are leaderboards for all the minigames. It's not much, but it is something. I know Breath of the Wild does have DLC, and while most of it's pretty cool, the feature that marks where you've been on your map shouldn't be something you have to pay for. It should have either been included from the beginning or been a part of a free patch. And Mario Odyssey isn't the kind of game that needs DLC. You can't really add much to make this game more enjoyable. Rather than paying for a few new stages, I'd rather just get a sequel. And while Amiibo support won't nudge my decision either way, I will say that Zelda did a better job with this by having Amiibos provide you with useful items and outfits. Mario Odyssey has a few features and gives you some cool outfits, but it could have done way more. It's nice to see Mario wearing Luigi and Wario costumes, but imagine if he could dress as Pikachu or Samus. I mean, he could dress as Diddy Kong, so why not? I guess because the other outfits require heads rather than hats, but come on, we can't even dress up as Link. That'd have been perfect. I am digging deep in the nitpick barrel, but it is still a missed opportunity, and I'd give the edge to Breath of the Wild in this arbitrary category. After everything I've said though, I think it's pretty obvious that if I had to choose one game to be a smidge better than the other, then it'd be Super Mario Odyssey. But that's only if you put a gun up my ass and made me choose. And I'm not choosing Mario Odyssey just because it's the game I've been playing more recently. I've given this a lot of thought, and even though Mario Odyssey is my final answer, it doesn't mean that I don't love Breath of the Wild. I mean, I played it for 145 hours and still counting. I definitely don't see myself playing Mario Odyssey for nearly as long, but in my opinion, the amount of time I will be playing Mario Odyssey will be more enjoyable. Breath of the Wild's awesome, but a lot of the downtime in the game isn't as fun as the downtime in Mario Odyssey. Mario keeps the fun flowing faster and more frequently. And while it's not a bad thing that Bato requires a little bit of patience, and it is nice to take your time and just enjoy the world you're in, personally, I just prefer cutting to the chase more often than not. But again, it depends on what I'm in the mood for. I'd rather be trapped on a desert island with Breath of the Wild than Mario Odyssey, and you get more bang for your buck out of the time you'll spend with Zelda, but both games are easily worth $60, and I'd rather have more fun for a shorter amount of time. And it's not like Mario Odyssey is a short game by any means. But don't forget, I'm not saying Breath of the Wild isn't fun. I'd never call it boring. It's just that the worst parts in Breath of the Wild, like when you're waiting around like an asshole for the rain to stop, aren't as fun as the worst parts of Mario Odyssey, which are literally the few seconds between walking from one moon piece to the next challenge where you can get the next. And even that's still pretty fun thanks to the nice music and environments there are to enjoy. In my opinion, the most fun you're gonna have at the peak of Mario Odyssey is a little better than the high points of Breath of the Wild. Both games are fantastic and damn near perfect. So before anybody eats my ass in the comments, let me just say one last time that none of my criticisms of either game are anything more than nitpicks I'm trying to find because I had to pick between the two. And if you prefer Breath of the Wild, then there's nothing wrong with that, since there really is no right or wrong answer, seeing as how both games are completely different from each other. And it is also worth noting that Breath of the Wild was Nintendo's first attempt at this type of game. So it'd be kinda like comparing Nintendo's first attempt at a 3D Mario game with Mario 64 to later and more polished 3D Zelda games that made a lot of improvements to the series like Wind Waker or Twilight Princess. Whatever comes after Breath of the Wild is sure to make huge improvements, and maybe I'll like that game more than Mario Odyssey. But as for now, I've got to declare Mario Odyssey just an ass hair better than Breath of the Wild. If I had to choose Game of the Year, though, I'd award it to the Wii U version of Breath of the Wild, just to troll the internet and get clicks on my website. Which game do you prefer, though? Let me know in the comments below, and like always, I'll pin whatever's most entertaining to me. Don't forget to like and share this video if you want to help this channel build street cred, and if you're super badass and cool like I know you are, then subscribe as well. Thanks for watching. My name's Cameron, and I'll see you next time.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.